Thanks, guys. It's really important to have this conversation today. It's been a really difficult week. The country, many of us, Black people, are reeling from a lot of violence that we've seen this week. We're reeling from this pandemic wreaking havoc in our communities. And we're trying to really understand and heal from the killings of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Sean Reed, Nina Pop. And what a lot of folks don't realize is that there are organizers on the ground that are in these communities, are being impacted by this trauma and violence, and are mobilizing and getting it done, and making sure that people are held accountable. So I'm really happy to have this conversation with you guys so that you can share with us all of your strategies, what you're thinking, how you're getting it done. I know, and many people may know, that you had an incident in South Bend with Eric Logan. I want to talk about Eric and find out more about Eric's life, how it impacted your community. And I also want to hear more about what you've done since then, how you engaged the Mayor Pete at the time, and really also hopefully hearing a bit from you guys about how we can heal as communities, how other communities that are experiencing this trauma, police violence, vigilante violence, how can we heal and move past, and what can we do to make sure that these things aren't happening to us again and again. Anyway, so thanks again for being here. And first, I'd love to hear a bit about how you started BLM South Bend.
Yeah, thank you for having us here. So we originally formed back in the fall of 2016 around another case of officer misconduct. There was a 17-year-old young man named Deshaun Franklin who was beaten and tased in his sleep in his own home and bed back in 2012. The officers were not properly reprimanded. I think they were just suspended for a few days from the force. One of those officers was Aaron Nepper, who has a long history of misconduct, and he was actually involved in the Eric Logan case as well. He loaded his body into the back of the car and drove him to the hospital. So we came together around Deshaun Franklin's case because in the summer of 2016, a federal grand jury had ruled in favor of the family, had acknowledged that their civil and constitutional rights had been violated by the South Bend Police Department, but that grand jury only awarded them with $18 total in compensation for the entire family. And so that case caught national news. We got a little buzz around that as well. We were out protesting. We started a campaign called Fire Aaron Nepper. We knew that we couldn't actually get him fired off the force, but we wanted to press city officials and Mayor Pete Buttigieg at the time to really work towards holding police officers accountable so that we don't have these kinds of cases of misconduct.
Right. And you mentioned Eric Logan, which I think a lot of people may be familiar with that case. Can you tell us a bit about Eric and what happened in that moment?
Yeah, I can say a little bit about that. So early in the morning, July 16th, Father's Day, Eric Logan, he was leaving his family's home, walking down the street. Apparently there were some calls made. It was late in the night. I believe around like 4 a.m. There were some calls made alleging that there was a Black man burglarizing vehicles in the area. And the officers approached him in a parking lot, pulled up on him, and they claimed that he was brandishing a knife and was coming towards them, and which prompted them to shoot him. And when they shot him, they alleged that he threw the knife and it hit the officer, and the officer shot him again, fatally killing him. So when that happened, the family was obviously devastated. And later that night, the following night, because this was early in the morning at 4 a.m. when it happened, but later that night, Mayor Pete had called for a press conference with the president of the city council, Tim Scott, and chief of police, Scott Ruskowski. as that press conference was forming and buzz was happening online around this shooting, I had reached out to the family. I just found his wife online, because South Bend's a small town. So more than likely, if you search for a name on Facebook, you'll likely find a common or mutual friend. So I was
Mhm.
able to find his wife. I messaged her, said, "Hey, I'm an organizer here, saw what happened, want to lend my support. How can we help?" She said they're calling for a press conference. Can you be there? I went down there, and it was truly a tragic scene. We were on the 14th floor, which is where the mayor's office is, and the family was allowed to come up, but not allowed to be in the room with the mayor. So they were in a separate room. So while Mayor Pete is on local news speaking to the situation, the family is in another room, probably just 200 feet away, waiting for answers. The mayor never acknowledged them. He never came and met with them or spoke with them, and they had a lot of questions. And so when the press conference wrapped up, they demanded that they be able to speak with Mayor Pete, and they met with him very briefly. They asked him a couple questions. They didn't like what they heard, and so they walked out, and they were understandably upset. And what's interesting about that is when we left, when we were out in the hallway getting ready to leave the county city building, which is where the mayor's office is housed, um, Eric Logan's brother, Tree, said, "I'm telling you right now, watch. Though when they go to pull the camera,
Yeah.
the footage, it will not exist. His camera will not be on. Watch."
So this was
And that's
before.
exactly what happened.
So right. So you didn't even know at that point that that there was no body camera footage
Right.
available.
Exactly. Yep.
When
Yep.
you heard about this, what prompted you to call the family? Did you find this story? Did you feel like there were holes in the story, or because I feel like we always hear like there's a knife, there's a cell phone, there's a this, there's a construction site, like there's always some kind of reason. Did you find that? Tell a little bit about the history of relationship and the disconnect between police and Black folks in South Bend. Like, what was it that made you feel like I need to get down, I need to talk to people?
Well, yeah, I mean, I have experience in doing this kind of organizing work, and so I understand that it's very important that you build a relationship with the family before you do anything, right? So I reached out to her. I was there, showed my support, and I saw a lot of comments online where folks were saying, 5'9", like he's not known to have a knife, maybe a gun, but certainly not a knife. And so just seeing the community's reaction to that, how seeing how heartbroken folks were, I knew that we had to do something. So that's why I acted as quickly as I could and tried to get to the press conference and to be there with the family and to offer any support that I could.
Yeah. Yeah. So after you found out there was no body camera footage, and you also talked a bit about the community and how folks were feeling when people found out that there was no footage to really corroborate any of the stories, what was the reaction?
Anger. People here don't trust the South Bend police because of decades of misconduct.
Hmm.
Decades of misconduct. There have been other officer involved murders among Black folks here. There was a case of Michael Anderson in 2012 where he was being chased by a police officer for whatever reason. And when the officer caught him, he alleged that Michael Anderson shoved several bags of drugs down his throat and tried to swallow them. And the officer, in trying to save his life, allegedly stuck a straw down his throat. And Michael Anderson ultimately died. We had no video camera footage, right? There was no dash camera footage, no body cams at that time. And so there was lots of questions. And so the relationship between Black folks and the police here is incredibly strained. And that's probably made most evident by the police tape scandal, which was in national news and followed Pete along his campaign trail, because those tapes apparently contained um, uh, conversations between officers talking about how they would set up Black folks, how they would conspire with the prosecutor to make sure Black folks were locked up. They were planning drugs on suspects. So we knew we had to respond to this, because this is something that the entire community was going to pay attention to. We knew that this was going to take off like wildfire. And when you have those moments where Black folks are paying attention and they're demanding justice, you got to be there. You got to be there. You got to show up to provide direction.
Right. Yeah. And so what happened next in the Eric Logan case after you found out there was no body cam footage? The community was upset. How did you step by supporting the family and the community? What steps did you take in order to make sure this was rectified?
So, obviously the first thing that we did was show support to the family, just if they had any needs. So helping them through just the grieving process, um, trying to help them find an attorney, which they were able to ultimately retain someone. Uh, but also they wanted his name to stay in the news. They didn't want this to get swept under the rug. So, we had a series of protests. We disrupted a national press conference that Pete Buttigieg was having at a local high school here.
May I intervene? Because
Yeah.
I think we missed some intricate details uh, right after the death of Eric Logan. After, of course, there was a memorial at the site. Then after we had a sit down with Mayor Pete when Black Lives Matter LA came to get us organized, to show us what organizing looks like on that scale. So then after Black Lives Matter South Bend and LA, both sat down, had a meeting with Pete, and Jordan Emanuel was there. And they could speak more to that, because I think that's the most powerful point of the movement when it came to how we were going to overcome the obstacles that we overcame. So the meeting with Mayor Pete we need to talk about that, Jordan.
Yeah.
And I wasn't there, so you, Emmanuel, can touch base on that.
Yeah, so Jordan and we had a meeting with Mayor Pete,
And how did that
and
meeting come about? Did you reach out to them? Did they reach out to you? How did you get that meeting?
we reached out to them. Isn't that correct?
Yeah. We reached out to him because, and this is why the disruption at the press conference is important.
Yeah.
Because when we disrupted that, obviously there was a lot of emotions. The community came out full force and just really hammered him. Well, at the end of that press conference, he actually told a lie. He said, "Well, I've been reaching out to these folks, like us activists, but no one has came to meet with us." And that was a complete lie. Like he had never reached out to us. So realizing that now he was sort of open to some kind of conversation, we decided, okay, well, let's engage him. We obviously have his feet to the fire. He's trying to save face. He's on he's on the presidential campaign trail right now. So let's engage him, and let's see if we can get some concessions, right? Like, let's see if we can get him to sign on to a special prosecutor. Let's see if we can get him to equip our body cameras with the right technology. But man, you can say more about that. I just want to make sure that folks understood how we got to the point where we met with Mayor Pete.
Yeah, so we came to him with a list of demands. We had about four different demands. It was called for the immediate removal of Officer O'Neill from his position. It was about having Chief Ruskowski get fired, as well as in charge overseeing this police department, who has been complicit in the amount of violence that is happening to Black and brown bodies historically. We called for their judicial body, the Board of Public Safety, for those members to be removed from their position for their dereliction of duty as well. And then we also called for implicit bias training within the police department, and also data. We wanted to be data driven in the work that we were doing. So what information did they have about the implicit bias within the police department?
And there was a test too, the IDI, the cultural competency test as well that we asked for. That went beyond just calling for implicit bias training.
And what is that?
Right.
Yeah, so it's the intercultural development inventory. It's a cultural competency test that's used nationwide. We had a member who is a trained administrator for that test, and she has used it in her work with teachers and principals, and it's a way of gauging where folks are in terms of their understanding of different cultures and different folks of different backgrounds.
And so what we wanted to do is again try to get a gauge as far as, okay, where's the police department as an aggregate in their cultural competency.
Right.
And at first, Mayor Pete was incredibly reluctant to say that. And then Jordan and I, when we talked to him, said that we're not here trying to dig in people's HR files, because that's the reason why he said that we couldn't look at them, because I mean, it's in their HR files, those are locked away. And we find that this is what Mayor Pete has been about. He hides behind bureaucracy when he doesn't want to do something. So he's saying, oh, there's red tape. We can't open up these HR files. And so our solution we propose is that we don't want information on individual people. We want to see if there a culture of lack of cultural competency within the police department, which looks at aggregate of information rather than individual officers. And then he was finally like, well, okay, yeah, we'll do that, because we don't really espouse to this bad apple sort of idea. There's a bad cop here, but it's a culture that's complicit in allowing these bad apples to really do their dirty work that they're doing. So we want to address, yes, we want to get bad officers out there, but we also want to address the culture. Hence why we wanted to get what is the whole department looking at in terms of cultural competency. So he gave us information on who to go to in terms of define that information. And so I had a meeting with this person. I'll just say her name. Her name is Christina Brooks. She's not in that position anymore. And it took forever for me to get a meeting with her. It took some strong arming by tactical CCing people on different emails to make sure that said, hey, the mayor promised that we could have this information. And so I finally had the meeting with her and with her associates, and she promised that I could have access and use my role as a researcher to have access to the information to craft this data set in order to understand what does cultural competency look like in the police department. I said everything was great. She was going to give me some paperwork to sign out. I mean, the end of the story is pretty obvious. I hadn't heard back from her about this at all since. So we see this pattern of people trying to get Black folks, particularly activists that are actually wanting to do something in the community, really tied up in these bureaucratic structures, and then they get lost and almost fade away into an abyss. And so there's this pattern that we've seen over and over and over and over with Mayor P and his associates that we said that we can't stand for this anymore, and we have to act and do something about it. But again, another example, we have 4 demands, and none of them were taken seriously, and none of them actually happened. And the one that we had the closest one to getting, he made sure and tactfully had that get lost amongst the bureaucracy.
Right. Okay. So after you were able to meet with Mayor Pete, provided these demands unmet, then what happens?
So then after, there was a town hall, and Jordan could speak to that because I wasn't even in the scene yet. So there was a town hall right after that, Jordan?
But that town hall is the one I spoke about earlier. That was before we actually met with Mayor Pete.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what opened the door for us because he said that he had reached out to us in the past, which was a lie. And so,
right.
Yeah, then we met with him. But we continue to go to meetings. So like the city council, we're having public meetings, and people came to that to hear about what the city council was going to do in response to the shooting. So there were community action group meetings, there were board of public safety meetings, and that's how Kat came into the work. We actually went to a city council meeting, and she had came like, I'm just seeing what's going on online, and I want to get involved.
So
I've
this
been
is
looking
important.
for.
It's important that people understand. So there are weekly meetings that happen that are meetings that are happening with bureaucratic offices, groups that are serve the community, that are coming together, and they are public.
Right.
These are public meetings. And so when something happens, if you're in your community, you need to change material conditions, you attend these meetings.
Right, exactly.
And you have a voice during these meetings, and you can say, this is what is this is what's happening, this is what we don't like,
right.
This is what you must change. And so that's what you're talking about. Those are the types of meetings that you started attending frequently around this topic, around these demands, in order to move them along. And then Kat became involved. Got it.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then they had, Kat, do you want to go ahead?
So yeah, I just kind of want to speak to the community action meetings that they were having, the community forums that they were having. So Black Lives Matter facilitated as well as attended just about all of those meetings. We watched the attendance dwindle as we started to learn in these meetings. These advisory meetings were conducted for the community to show sympathy towards the officers. It wasn't geared at all toward the victims of police brutality. So here we are sitting in these meetings, trying to bring justice to Eric Logan's situation. And as Manuel said, they'll keep activists busy, so one hand doesn't know what the other has, in store for it. So here we are busy. I think there were 7, 8 meetings. Relentlessly at these meetings, and nothing came of it. But all the scenarios at these meetings were geared towards sympathizing with the police. So we sat in those meetings, and we thought that we were bringing justice to Eric Logan's situation, his family, trying to figure out, so what are the solutions? We're giving our open and honest opinions. We also had to address the police because they were showing up with guns, and here we are at a community forum because of police brutality. And, they're trying to be very persuasive and, making sure that people don't show up because they're making them uncomfortable, So so we're seeing the attendance dwindle down. So then after we move into other actions, so what else is it that needs to be done to bring justice, which brought us to asking for the resignation of Mayor Pete's administration. We felt that after diving into data, we felt that his record was a failed attempt to, his constituents here in South Bend. And we thought it would be most imperative to ask for his resignation through, media, so that everyone would know that we're not going to just sit back and allow, our leaders to pretend as if they're trying to solve problems. And we know that definitely the problems still exist now. So we know any of those attempts never were seen through to bring justice.
Yes.
And the timing became incredibly dire, especially when Mayor Pete's running for president. He's saying he has this complete Black support. There's these Black leaders within the community that completely support who he is, while at the same time, Pete has a Black problem in town, and he is not telling the true story. So we wanted to be that voice. There needed to be a voice to step up and say, you cannot co-opt our Black pain and move it to the side like everything is okay. So somebody needed to say something. This is at the same time that he was coming out with his Douglas plan. This beautiful plan about how he was going to fix Black America. But when there are structural issues by design that are happening in South Bend, that Douglas plan has not seen the light of day, even in our own town. So who is he trying to say that everything is okay, like this is Camelot, when there is structural issues that are happening that he is just ignoring? And this was our opportunity to say, you can't use Black people, and especially you can't use Black people in South Bend, Indiana.
And what you're talking about is so important, because what you're talking about is holding people accountable, and not just thinking that you vote for someone, or that you are just you have to take what you get. You're holding people accountable for what they say, for the role that they have, and for their responsibilities to all of their constituents. And so so I hear that, you call for Mayor Pete's resignation right when he was running for president. So there was that opportunity to hold him accountable. Tell us a little bit more about that, and how that went, and where you showed up, and all of this accountability.
Can I just say, let me say something about that real quick, Kat, because Kat actually is the person who called for his resignation in the local media. The reason why we called for that is because when we met with him, we actually had a discussion about these community action group meetings, right? So these meetings were really supposed to be something that was unprecedented, right? It was supposed to be this increased transparency, where the city was opening, and the police department and the Board of Public Safety was opening itself up for scrutiny, right? So they had these meetings allowing for citizens to come and actually look at police department policies and procedures and weigh in on what needed to be changed, right? So we thought, okay, this is great, right? Like we protested, we held disruptions, right? We had a 24-hour essentially standoff outside of the county city building. And now Mayor Pete is saying, hey, I'm hearing what y'all are saying. Like, let's have these meetings. Let's talk about these policies, right? So when we met with him, we said, okay, will you be at these meetings? And he said that he was going to be at some of the meetings. But every meeting we went to, he wasn't there. He didn't show up, right? So we're here, we're participating. Like Kat said, they're giving us these scenarios, and they're centering the pain and the experiences and the trials of officers, but nothing about community members who are impacted by police officer misconduct. So over time, we saw that the attendance started to dwindle, but we understood that it was important that we still maintain and held that space, that we still maintain our presence and had a voice and a say in the larger dialogue, right? I mean, the meetings were so bad that some of the facilitators didn't even show up, and that's how Emmanuel became a facilitator, because the facilitator for his group didn't even show up, and so they were like, "Well, can you facilitate?" And so then he took that on. So we knew these meetings were a farce, and they were just a way of making him look good. Yeah. And so when we called for his resignation, more reporters started like asking, like, okay, what's going on? Like, how has he responded? Why are you calling for his resignation? And we just let them know, like, yeah, he's going around the country bragging about, these community action group meetings that are taking place, but he hasn't even shown up to one.
So Kat, how did you do it? Tell us what that is like to call for your mayor's resignation. How did you do
that? I mean, it's terrifying, because we live in a small city. So you instantly know that there's going to be some kind of backlash. At least you prepare yourself mentally for that backlash and the repercussions, So for me, it was something that had to be done. We were at a point where we weren't being taken seriously. And I think that Pete just thought that it was going to be easy to get rid of us and we would just go away. So things had died down a little bit in the city regarding the death of Eric Logan. And so we wanted to make sure that Pete didn't think for a minute that this was over, So asking for his resignation for me was the most terrifying thing to do, but I know that, this is our duty. If we plan on getting any kind of results or resources allocated to our community, that's the reason why we're fighting, you know, and as terrifying as it was, I wasn't going to back down from it. It was my duty, so I seen it through.
And how did you do that? Did you call for his resignation in the press? Did you send a letter?
Yeah, we sent out a press release, and we met up with the media. And the reason why it was just so terrifying, because Pete is looked at as like a small time hero. Like he's most people's local hero. So I remember my neighbors, you know, approaching me, you know, saying, "You should be ashamed of yourself. You single-handedly dismantled his presidency." And I said, "You know, I can't take the credit. Like, I'm with the organization. Like, you know, Pete dismantled his own, you know, political career, you know, by not meeting the needs of the community, you know." And so I lived in my house, you know, sometimes not sleeping, just fear, you know, the consequences of doing that. But like I said, I was committed. I've been committed to the cause. It's not about me. It's bigger than me. So yeah.
Yeah, he wasn't present here. So while the community is in turmoil, he's around the country campaigning and still getting paid by the citizens of South Bend. So we're like, well, why are we paying you to go and campaign when your community here has been deeply affected by this death and you're nowhere to be found? You're around the country talking about what's happening in South Bend, but you're not here. You're not showing up.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to send a message to him because he really thought that things had sort of like died down, that they had it under control. They were having these meetings. We said, no, we want him and the country to know that he's problematic and he just needs to go.
Right. Right. And what's the ripple effect of this and this moment and being able to call for Mayor Pete's resignation and holding him accountable for the death of Eric Logan and his inactivity and his not meeting demands and not giving this the attention that it requires? What's the big impact that this has, or the either the impact or the hoped impact that this has in your community, and what can others learn from this?
I think for me, the word that I heard the most often at the community action group meetings before people stopped coming was the word accountability. And we want to put all of our politicians on notice. If you don't do your job, we will come and get you. And that's exactly what we want to do, is that you are called to be public servants. We are your boss. And if you don't take your job seriously, we will make sure that you are well known for your inability to do your job, and we will hold you accountable, as the people have been calling for.
So us taking on Pete as the Goliath around here, it shocked a lot of people because he was this rising star in the Democratic Party, right? Like, he's this Harvard minted Rhodes Scholar, who went from small town mayor to major presidential contender. And so for folks to see us here locally take him on, we have a lot of enemies. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of people who don't like us, but also at the same time, there's a lot of people in power who are afraid of us because they're like, well, if they can do that to him, what can they do to me? So anytime that there were like public meetings, there would be a word going out like, oh my gosh, Black Lives Matter might show up. Like, we just want to make sure that nobody comes and disrupts the meeting. We don't want a whole bunch of commotion. And that's not, we disrupt, but when we disrupt, we come with facts. I mean, we have substance to us. We're not just screaming and yelling. We are pointing out gaps in policies and procedures. So, I mean, we do our due diligence.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point because, as you clearly articulated, there are very specific, logical, reasonable, necessary demands that you put forth. And it's not, they are not being heeded. And once they are not heeded, once the people in power are not doing their job by having conversations as promised and just pretending like it's not happening, what else is there to be done but a louder noise?
Right.
And
Right.
it is the way that the pendulum has to swing. We have to move. That's how you dismantle the systems that are built around white privilege and white supremacy. We must dismantle those. And in order to do that, we have to amplify our voices and build power. And so it's a very, very good point, and to mention, or to make sure people understand, that it is not chaos, it is strategy.
Right.
It is not noise, it is movement, it is
Right.
building, it is power. It is really accessing what we need as a community to be acknowledged as human beings. It is reclaiming humanity. Anything else around that?
And Mayor Pete he's he's a smart guy, and he really understands identity politics. And so he had put these was really good about putting these certain folks in place to sort of insulate himself from any kind of real criticism, right? So we've mentioned the Board of Public Safety here, just so folks know. The Board of Public Safety is a 5-person body that oversees police discipline, disciplinary matters, training, hiring, firing, and promotions. And all of those folks are appointed by the mayor, and that's state law. So there's nothing that we could do on a local level to change that. That is set by the state of Indiana. Okay. Well, when Mayor Pete would face his criticism of, well, why didn't you form a citizens review board? Why didn't you respond to the concerns of minorities? Well, he'll say, well, we do have a citizens review board. We do have a board of public safety, and it's actually majority minority. So because there are 3 Black men on this board of public safety, he can say, well, I made sure that the Board of Public Safety was diverse, that they're community leaders. And so I did what I could do. I can't make them hire, fire, or reprimand an officer in any kind of way. All I can do is make an appointment. But that is your power. Your power is in your appointments and your removals.
That's right. That is right.
Yeah.
So what's happening now? So what's BLM South Bend focusing on now? Mayor Pete is obviously out of the race. What's going on now? And what's next?
Yeah. So right now we have our expungement series going on. Just working on the people in our communities, trying to make them a space to be able to work, receive housing. Also, we're going to next be launching our driver's license renewal program, and just trying to work toward more of a trauma-informed community. Yes. You guys have anything else to add?
Yeah, it's something that we've been in the works on, is starting a part of our organization called Black Queer Lives Matter, and realizing that people experience intersecting traumas and intersecting experiences of domination at different levels. So again, providing a space for people that identify within those communities to specifically have a space where they can get some respite and reprieve, and also some power building within those individuals as well.
And we're still pushing for police accountability. So because of our work, the Board of Public Safety and the legal department of the city of South Bend is looking towards adopting a police discipline matrix, which it has never had. So it's never really had a standard or a process for removing officers who engage in misconduct. So that's on the table now, and they've put a draft forward, and we've offered comments on it. We've been at community action group meetings around it. And then also, we've been working with a city councilman named Henry Davis Jr., who has a long history of pushing for police accountability dating back to 2012, when he called for body cameras, when he called for a real citizens review board. And now almost, 7 years later, we are in the process of actually getting a police complaint board that is essentially staffed by citizens on the books here in South Bend. So this is it's a critical time for us right now. Unfortunately, due to COVID, that held up a lot of our work. But we are, still pursuing justice for Eric Logan, and we are still looking to hold police officers accountable here in South Bend.
And what advice would you give to other communities, particularly now where there's a lot of communities who are currently in trauma? What advice would you give to organizers and people and families that are affected?
I'd say hold each other extra tight. I mean, in this period of mayhem and trauma, I think it's easy to lash out at the person standing next to you. Um, but to realize that we are collectively struggling together and that we're all in this together. And as somebody might feel hurt, um, know that the person next to you is feeling hurt too. And so to engage in radical acts of love.
It's beautiful.
Definitely. Also, I mean, I give them this piece. I'd say to them that this battle that we're fighting, it's been fought before. We're still at a point where we're asking people to be civil, and they're not gonna give us, it's not gonna be handed over. We're gonna have to take it, and until we can make sure that we can unite as one person, we have to find a way to be more patient with one another, and meet people where they are.
Right.
But we're all in this together, and I want them to understand that this is the time for accountability. You have to have accountability at your house. You have to have accountability in your community, and you definitely have to hold these leaders accountable. That's their duty.
And I think we need to frame the conversation different. We are in a civil rights movement right now, and we need to own that we are in the midst of a movement. We don't have to look back to Martin Luther King, Malcolm X back in the 50s and 60s at a movement, but we are in the midst of so many issues that need to be solved right now. And I think if we can hold that up and to say we are in maybe a global civil rights movement, maybe a new civil rights movement, then maybe that will give us the impetus and the sort of collective reminder of what it takes to actually make things happen.
Oh yeah, Kaylee, I thank you for allowing this to happen and organizing this, Queen. But I think it's important to put on record that our efforts couldn't have been as successful as they have been if it hadn't been for other grassroots organizations that came to our aid, that believed in us, that believed in what we were doing. We have Bullets for Life. We have Food Not Bombs. These people, we have Mr. Fix-It Ford. These people came to our aid and assisted us, helped us to feed the community 24 hours at the 24-hour standoff. These people have, whatever we've asked of them, they've been so accommodating. We're blessed in South Bend to have these grassroots organizations that see the oppression, and they stand with us. Even when we were traveling, we were in Iowa, and we're disrupting. It was Palestinians that stood with us. So we have to be make sure that nationally we organize that we thank those people that helped us along the way.
Yes, very important. Well, thank you all. How can people follow your work? How can people get more information? How can people help?
Yeah, so they can follow us on Facebook, Black Lives Matter South Bend. They can also follow us on Twitter, BLM, or @BLM South Bend, or they can email us at blm.southbend@gmail.com. We're very active here locally. We're attending events and doing things on a weekly basis. And so if folks want to learn how we do what we do, they can reach out to us, or if they want to, get involved here locally, we welcome them.
I might I add, like this job that and the scale of work is tremendous, and the way that we organize, we need resources. So if anyone, is able to donate to us, that's how we keep running. So definitely all donations are accepted and appreciated.
You can also reach the South Bend team through blacklivesmatter.com on the chapter page. You can reach the South Bend team that way as well. And great. Thank you so much, Kat. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Thank you so much, Jordan, for being here and just for everything that you do. And we hold you and we uplift you, and we are internally grateful for the work that you're doing for our people. We thank you for your inspiration and your creativity, and your work, because it's hard. I know it's hard. It's very, very hard. So again, thank you so much, each of you, and appreciate this time that we got to spend together.